purpose. Oh, it is being live streamed. Cool. All right. Maybe it just was going to my page instead of my group.
Oh, we're live now. That means we're live.
We're live, so you can't cuss anymore.
Good to know. Best on my best language.
Yeah, I think my language is probably more problematic than yours is.
Hey, if you're gonna cuss, then I get to too.
Sure. All right. We just have to go or something weird that makes sense. So here's why I wanted to chat with you today and why I wanted to do it in a both live and recorded setting. I feel like, I just love you as a human and feel like there's any great excuse to talk to you is a great excuse. And B, I thought that the conversation that we had on your yoga podcast, which you'll have to call out by name and then remind me so I can tag it in the thingies.
Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast.
Awesome. I'm just going to write that down so I can do it again later. Yoga, I know what it is because I follow it, but still looking for things. What a waste of time. So I really loved our conversation. And I think that what has shifted for me since that conversation is that my brain has really solidified around this idea that it is time for radically kind people to become comfortable with power and money. I don't remember where I heard it, but I can't stop saying it since I did. So to me, that feels very aligned with what I think that I heard you say in different ways about different subjects, in yoga class. And I think that was one of the things that I found so unique and awesome about the classes that I took with you live was this idea of tree pose is as much about keeping your cool as anything else. And that should have a real world application of, the example you often gave was dropping your keys. And like, either you can get all wound up and pissed off about it, or you can just be like, oop, drop my keys, oop, drop my leg, oop. And so I think just that, what I think of as householder yoga, I don't know if that's the correct term or not, feels to me a little bit, tied into this just idea of like all of the tough things that we do, and that you shouldn't have to go live in the rarefied atmosphere of a mountain or an accounting firm to be able to understand and get the day-to-day stuff done. So that's the introduction to the this is what I want to talk about. And I'd love to just be like, download, lay it on me, son. What do you got?
Well, first of all, thank you. I love you very much. You were like in my life at a very formative time, before I opened the center, and just, you were somebody who we had an exchange that stuck with me ever since. And, when you came on the show more recently, I took a lot of the things that we talked about and put them into place. I actually had some pretty big, I had the biggest financial shift of my life since we spoke, which was I managed to get a refinance on this house, because I don't know if I talked with you about it. I can't remember. But when I got this house, it was a complete fluke. I'd been a yoga teacher for 20 years. I had this, yoga center for 10 years, which, was like doing well on paper in some regards. And, I was even able to kind of get someone to buy me out of my lease at the end there. I had like a little parachute out. But when it came time to try to buy a house at age 40 something, what I looked like on paper just didn't fit into the algorithm that the Fannie Mae uses to decide whether or not you qualify for the mortgage or whatever. And so the only way I was able to get a house was because a selling agent convinced a divorcing couple who were in a bind to hold a mortgage for me. Wow. So I had a privately held mortgage, but the only way he was able to convince them to do it was to make it a 5-year term. It was amortized over 20 years. So it had like a fixed rate for that 5 years, but it had a big balloon payment after 5 years. So he basically gave me a chance to either refinance or come up with a big lump sum within 5 years. It was like my one shot ever at owning a home. And so, my plan was to like make as much money as I can, look as good as I can on paper, and try again in like 3 years. So 2018, 2019 went pretty good. I did all right. I busted ass and I did pretty good. And then I spoke to you right around then, right after 2019. I had one more year I had to get in, but we all know what happened this last year. Everything fell apart.
Don't we ever? Yeah.
The world fell apart. So sort of like May 2020 is when I really started to freak out about it. I was like, oh no, I'm going to lose this fucking house. Excuse me. See, I just did it. Sorry. I'm going to lose this house if I don't figure out what I'm going to do, And so I just wrote a carefully worded email about my situation. And I found like 10 local loan advisor, loan broker kind of people that seemed like they'd been at it for a long time and they lived near me. And I just sent out this email to 10 people. I heard back from 3 of them. One of them said he didn't think it could help me. One of them said they weren't sure, but it could hurt to try. And one said, I think I can help you. And I spent the last year essentially working with this guy and his team at Cross Country Mortgage. And basically, I just sent them everything like I had. And fortunately, I had organized things very well. Thanks to you. I had done like the bank account thing and I had very clear funnels. Like you could see exactly all the online sales money coming into one account. Like it was dedicated. It was very clear that I could show someone if they're saying how much we need to see that you're making money. I could say, look, here it is. Here's the Stripe statement. Here's the bank statement. This is all the money that's coming in, because for someone like me who doesn't have an employer, I'm self-employed. The bar was high and the hoops were many. So I sent them everything I had for a year. And I basically won this guy and their team over. I think they just believed in me. They felt like this guy clearly deserves to get this mortgage and he can afford it, but they actually couldn't get me approved. They had to get me an exception granted. They granted me an exception and I closed on it like 4 weeks ago. So it's a 30-year fixed. I no longer have to worry. As long as I can come up with the $1,400 every month, we get to stay here for as long as I want. And it's just like, it's such a huge burden. So when you talk about somebody who's like trying to live a life of yoga or whatever you call being kind people or whatever, and like feeling like beaten back by the system, for the first time in my life, I feel like, oh, you can't mess with me, at least on some level, you know what I mean? Like, but I will say I felt like I had to like open a door and a wall in order to do it. Like we had to find a workaround and a loophole, but it's possible is what I guess I want to say. And I do think that, some of the things that you talked about in terms of just me getting my mind right around money and getting my mind right around the way like financial institutions see me, like not the way I see me, right? But the way like the financial institutions see me, and to not to understand that and like not let that affect how I feel about me, So in the end, I do think it's possible, and especially now things are so, I don't know, like landlords don't have the same power they once did, frankly. So I don't know, I've been talking with a lot of other teachers about thinking creatively about the situation. And I certainly think, back to your original question, for me personally, it's been a huge milestone to have this place to live that I own, that doubled in value in the 3 years that I lived in it,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I remember having that same feeling when I bought my apartment in Williamsburg in 2008. That again was just sort of this magic moment of the market totally dropped, the interest rates were super low. I had 2 grandmothers die, which is going to happen. It's sad, but it's going to happen. And just the beauty of all of that coming together in one moment, and me making the excellent choice of I'm going to just take this money that I didn't have yesterday and use it to buy something for tomorrow. And so I guess, when I think of that, that mantra, for lack of a better word, of it's time for radically kind people to be comfortable with money and power. I think what's interesting to me, and so what I'm still curious about, is, did you feel like there was any mindset shift for you? Because, I mean, I think it's a very bold and wise move to send out an email to 10 mortgage brokers, right? That shows a lot of proactivity and creative thinking and deep commitment to the outcome. And I'm wondering if that's, I mean, that seems in line with what I know of your personality anyways. So I don't know that I would say, oh, clearly our talk created that shift in you. But I'm interested in hearing your thoughts.
Well, I mean, honestly, I think that there was a lot of things that I did in relationship to our conversation, just practical things in terms of how I was organizing my money, and even like organizing how my debt was. Like I did a number of kind of just bare bones things that we kind of talked about.
Yeah.
But in terms of bringing about, I don't know, this mortgage, I have to say, to me, it's much more like mystical. I have to say, like I knew, having been through it once before, and just being, I consider myself an educated person, that the only way that I was going to get a mortgage is to find a champion. Like I needed somebody who knew how to navigate that world, who believed in me. Like that's the only way I could do it. And so I believe I did like a little magic working in the email. I believe in that stuff, that I put my soul, I mean, I didn't even tell the story about how I got the house. Originally, it was the same thing. We tried to get the house. We couldn't get the house. I was on Zillow looking for rentals, feeling like totally dejected. And the house we were trying to get popped up in the sidebar for 10,000 less than we had seen it for. And there was a anonymous contact form to the selling agent. And I just, in a moment, like I kind of meditated for a moment and like put my soul into a message to say, and it just said, if the owners were ever interested in renting it, please let us know. And he contacted me and said, I think I may have found a way for you to own it. And so, even with this mortgage, there were so many twists and turns. I didn't get approved. And then they contacted me later because they just fought for me, like there were so many turns in it that ultimately I do think there is a certain, you asked a question about mindset, and I earnestly go about my life and be as best a person as I can. And sometimes when it comes to money and the way our systems work, it just feels completely like it's not worth anything. It doesn't matter if I'm a good person. It doesn't matter if I'm trying to be kind, or none of that matters to the underwriters, right? And so in a way, there was a kind of belief. I have to believe that goodness can prevail, or I don't know how to say it, that I don't know, that there is a kind of harmony and justice to the way life happens. And that's a hard thing to say when there's so much injustice and so much disharmony. And I'm so privileged to be some white guy who, I got my mortgage. You know what I'm saying? Like, I hear voices in my head saying, oh, you're being an idiot right now. But I believe that there is I don't know, something in me that I have say about.
Yes.
And it's one of the only things I have say about, which is sort of how I respond or how I engage the world or how I think about myself in the world. And I do think that getting that in the right way for myself absolutely leads to any of the good things that happen for me.
Yeah. There's a beautiful phrase. I'm going to get the book wrong. It was such a good book. Give me a moment. I have to Google it because I don't want to get it wrong. The final quote in the book is, resilience is the secret of joy. Maybe the book is called The Secret of Joy. It was a great book.
That's so interesting. You say that. I had a mentor figure in college who, I don't know, when I was first exiting college, I for the only time in our whole relationship, I asked her for advice. I was like, can you give me any advice? And she just said resilience. That was the only word she said.
Yeah. It's called Possessing the Secret of Joy. I knew I was going to get that wrong. So it's Alice Walker, and it's a book about female genital mutilation, of all happy topics. But I think that this is the through line that I'm trying to pull in here. It's always got to get weird with me for some reason.
I don't know how we got to genital mutilation, Ian. You lost me for a moment here. I'm trying to catch up. I'm trying to catch up.
The point being that I think that is the through line, regardless of privilege. This idea that, and I think that is just one of the fundamental spiritual truths of how to be a calm person managing the world, is we can only be responsible for our own actions and our own responses to things. But I think resilience is crucial, especially, everywhere. I won't even say especially, that it doesn't really matter who you are or where you are or what you're facing. The ability to cultivate resilience, whatever that means, whatever that looks like, whether it's just, getting through another day because everything around you is falling apart, or, managing to be resilient enough to have faith in yourself and reach out and send those emails and stay open to the possibility of kindness mattering to, a very cold machine. It allows for that possibility. And I think, that probably is the piece that's of interest to me the most, because I think it's also one of those things, resilience is not a given. And most of the people that I know that really feel struggle and feel that overwhelm are people who don't have a lot of resilience for whatever reason. 9 times out of 10, it's past trauma, or current trauma. But it's, that seems to be the sort of the secret to managing. And I think that's probably what I'm trying to help move the needle on a little bit with people that are what I consider to be radically kind, right? It doesn't matter what's going on around me. I'm choosing to stay in my own integrity and see what that allows to happen that would not have allowed if I'd yelled at someone or given up or, not chosen to be vulnerable. Although again, vulnerability without resilience can be really dangerous. Being vulnerable just to be vulnerable is not a advised activity.
I know what you're talking about. I'll say, I went to acting training. Most of what I do as a yoga teacher, and like my spiritual well-being had to do with initially reconciling the loss of my mother, who died when I was 16. So when I went to acting school at age 18, I had so much unresolved pain and grief in me. And acting training was all about making you vulnerable, about like making you able to access your emotions, breaking down your barriers. But it didn't do anything really to build you up or to give you like what you're talking about, like a foundation of resilience to go off of. So it kind of left me really messed up and semi-suicidal, like to your point, like just getting vulnerable without a way to process what might be there is not a very safe thing to do. I managed to build some tools of resiliency. That's where yoga came in. That's why that's become such a passion for me, because that's how I managed to get myself right in that way. But it was overcoming that loss that I think developed the resilient muscle. It's like, if I can still feel good about life after my mom dies when I'm 16, whatever, bring it on, or something like that. Like there's always been a baseline. Well, that's not as bad as my mom dying. So that's built a like what you're talking about, a resiliency for me to, I think, navigate, you know, you called it the cold machine. And for me, I've actually, one of the ways that it's been helpful for me to look at it is to try to look at it as more of like an adventure or something like,
yeah.
And I have an inspirational fictional character that I always bring to mind, which is the De Niro character from the movie Brazil. Do you know the movie Brazil, and how
I
De
do. It's a
Niro
great
like
movie.
comes out of the walls and he just like understands how to hack it and like fix the thing like that? You know, I have this business partner who's really helped me kind of do an equivalent of that when it comes to like making money as a yoga teacher. You know, we use this 1,000 true fans idea. I don't know if we talked about that.
Mm-mm.
And single use apps. We have all these philosophies that we've like really embraced so that we can own our own digital landscape and kind of like do the things that big corporations do only so much that we're okay. Like you said, stay in integrity. We have what we call the douche line. Like there's a line at which if we go over, we no longer feel in our integrity.
Yeah.
So a lot of times it's like understanding, okay, well, this is what people do to, if we double the price of something and then give 70% discounts,
right,
we will sell a bunch of them, you know, and how do we feel about doing that? Do we feel okay about doing that or not? But to kind of like, we call it the sthira sukha of business, sthira sukha being a yoga term of like the balanced effort, you know, like the making it happen, but then allowing it to happen and just striking the chord where we feel in authenticity in what we're doing. Yep. So in any case, I really do think that navigating the cold machine has meant this kind of, I don't know, cavalier, we can hack this system, you know, in a way. And you can, because that, I mean, they haven't completely closed the internet down entirely. So you can still do it to some degree.
Right. And I think, I mean, I feel like that concept of sthira sukha comes in all the time, right? In all sorts of ways for me. And I wish that that were a more translatable concept or phrase, you know, being like, well, just approach it strong soft. It sounds a little goofy,
well,
you know?
Well, you know what we've been calling it in this yoga business class, that basically what happened is when the pandemic happened, I was already set up. Like my business partner in 2016, like a year and a half before I sold the center, I told him, I said, I'm not going to renew the lease. And he said, you have to start live streaming your classes. And I said, you're crazy. Yoga's live. It's about people being in the same room. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to put myself on camera. And he said, if you don't, you're stupid. You don't understand. And you're going to let go of the center. Everything's going to be moving online. It already is. And if you don't do this now, all these people you've met over 10 years, like Ian, will have no way to connect with you if they want. And if you do it, you will be able to teach a class from your living room anywhere in the world. And he convinced me, and I started doing that. And then especially when I moved to Pennsylvania, we really got it in place here, my new place in Pennsylvania. So I was all set up since 2017. And when the pandemic hit and every yoga teacher on the planet had to jump on, I was already totally in place. And not only that, we had switched to a subscription model and done like a bunch of things that had definitely been the key to like my survival as an independent creator, like just understanding the difference between in-person classes and online classes in terms of how you take money for them. Like they're not the same and they shouldn't be treated the same in a way. So things like that really proved to work. So at some point we decided we should just show people. So we started this class, and we've just been completely transparent. Like we show all of our spreadsheets over the last 4 years and like what's worked and what hasn't worked. So we've been kind of like going through this. So when we talk about sthira sukha in that class, we call it the bliss money balance.
Nice.
That there's a certain things that you do just for your bliss, just because they feel good and they're your passion. And then there's things that you need to do in order to make money. And there's a balance between them. And sometimes you do things even though it's not great money. And sometimes you do things for money, even though it's not as much bliss. But having to strike that chord is sort of like a steer to sukha when it comes to being a independent creator and trying to make a living at it.
Yeah. And that was one of the concepts that I definitely leaned into when I was sort of helping people through the initial pandemic, was starting from what is it you provide to your clients now, and how do we change the delivery system without changing the end result? You know, and that sounds like that was essentially the process that you guys went through just before the pandemic happened, right? How do we shift what we need to shift to show up online and still give the people that, you know, want from us the thing that they want in the way that we feel good about doing it?
Absolutely. And I think, you know, to our earlier point, I can't remember if we were live yet, just even about social media, when we did that, when we really like started looking at it, like, where do I actually make my money? Who are those people? They were not the people hitting like, you know, that it basically boiled down to like the most fundamental basis was an email list and billing, like a billing system. Like, you didn't even need a website necessarily. Like, I know teachers who are actually doing better than a lot of other teachers with just an email list and a billing system and nothing else. And then if their audience is beyond that, like if it's an online audience beyond just their 50 people or whatever they have on an email list, then a website makes sense. But like to your point, like, be clear about, well, what do I want? Like, we talk about what's your max, like not just like what's the minimum you need to make in order to pay your bills, but like what's your max that you need would want to make even.
Right.
And ultimately kind of like being really clear for yourself. What is it being a yoga teacher to you? Is it just like you feel like you should get some compensation because you worked hard for it, but you don't really need the money to survive? Are you trying to make a living at it? What are you okay with? Because you might not be able to make a living at it. So what role would it play in your life if you weren't? And if you do want to make a living at it, what are you willing to do for that? Like, how much sort of sacrifices or how much time and energy do you have if you have a family and kids and stuff to do some of the things that you might do that would help that?
Yeah.
And that comes back to a lot of what we talk about is when you're self-employed, it's like people don't account for admin time.
Right.
It was like one of the biggest things that I had to learn. And like, we don't even account for all of these hours we're spending doing shit that doesn't even help.
Yeah.
Like registering every person into class, like having to do something for every person who comes to your class you can't, it's not sustainable. So just getting clear about the parameters of what you're doing is this bliss money balance question. Because if it's going to require too much admin, it takes away all the bliss, even if it helps the money, you know, or whatever. Yep. Like, so in any case, I might have lost the thread. I might have gone off.
No, not tangent. At all. There is no losing the thread. The thread goes with us. Let's talk more about this idea of maximum. And I say that because of two reasons. One, I feel like that's one of the discussions that's often missing. You know, there used to be a space in Midtown Manhattan. I believe it was called In Good Company. It was like a women's co-working network. And the women that owned it or ran it had a book called The Big Enough Company. Again, terrible with names. I'm sure that's not actually the name of the book. But it was this idea of, right, if you are a solo person and you don't plan to scale, you know, what's the good advice for you for where you are? And I think I generally like to push on that edge a little bit for people. And because I think it is super important to know, like, what's your range of happiness, but what would happen if your maximum was 15 people and suddenly you had 50 people really interested? Is that something, right? That you'd
we call that the good problem.
Right, exactly.
That's just to say right now, that is not a problem that most yoga teachers have.
Right. But
but
and
I
I guess
understand
I'm
your
thinking
question.
beyond yoga, right? Because we
Yeah.
also work with a lot of mental
Mhm.
health professionals and online coaches, et cetera. Um, so just this idea of being open to that possibility, knowing that, you know, if you choose to invest probably heavily into some sort of marketing, which that may not be on your plan, that that would be a possibility. And so to, you know, one of my favorite things that I talk about with clients is just because you make the money doesn't mean you have to keep it. Right.
Mhm.
And so knowing like this is the range where my bliss will glow the most, if you will, but that what would happen if I had the opportunity to triple that? Would that just be admin? Would that allow me to delegate some of this stuff that I don't like? Is that even of interest to me? And not dismissing the possibility of either banding together with similar practitioners and finding, you know, sort of a co-created thing, or again, it comes back to, well, what do you want?
Well, I think I don't. We might disagree here some. I don't know. What I will say is, I scale is a huge question for everybody in the yoga world right now, and I think that scaling up is easier to do than sometimes gets sold to people when they prepare to be scaled up before they're there. Like my pushback is that there's a mentality. It's a mentality thing for me. Maybe we're actually not in disagreement. It's just like there's a growth mentality and like a sustainability mentality. And
Yep.
the idea that I got to do a bunch of stuff right now, even before my business started, even before I have an email list, to prepare for the possibility that I'm going to have the problem that you're talking about, that I'm going to suddenly have more people than I have room for or whatever, actually ends up impeding the process of building the thing from the bottom up, like with your friends and family and building your email list. Like, it's like people put the horse before the cart or whatever it is when it comes to this idea of being able to scale. And what I found is like some of the things, like even in terms of marketing. Okay, so if I have $100,000 I can spend on Facebook ads, I might be able to make $110,000 off of that or whatever. But like if I do that, what I experienced was I'll get a big bump. Like we can juice it. We can use those tools, those marketing tools to like juice our sales. But and we can see it over like 5 years now. It'll go up and then there'll be a big dip down. Like those aren't my real people. They're not.
Right.
We just got them because we used some effective techniques to click. And so that actually is not good for me. That's a
Totally.
growth mentality. I got to keep goosing it. I got to keep goosing it and moving farther and farther away from my integrity. So marketing, and it is marketing, but just to those 4,000 people who are like my real people, and having it be a trajectory, a
right.
slow upward trajectory, rather a directional thing, rather than these big surges and then down swells and then I'm screwed. So again, for me, the setting of the top is like a mindset thing where in my mind, I don't have to try to get as big as I possibly can.
Absolutely.
I just need to meet some certain metrics and like to feel like it's going in the direction that I want it to go or I need it to go.
Yeah.
To your question though, of course you want to have a little forethought that if you get to the good problem, like I moved from a 600 square foot loft, the space that I had, with a maximum of 12 people. So if I wanted to do workshops or whatever I wanted to do, I had my own space to do that. But after a year of the pandemic and really jerky landlords, it no longer made sense. You know, like I basically paid for it with an online product. So I didn't have pressure to get people there in person, but it no longer made sense. So 3 months ago, I moved into a shared space around the corner from my house with a photographer and went from $800 a month to $300 a month. So, you know, I got to set my stuff up and put it back down. It's not only my space, but still it's more appropriate for what my needs are and where we are. Now, things are starting to come back. People are getting vaccinated. I've got an outdoor space right out the back there that I can start doing some classes that I'm probably going to do. So I can foresee a time where, oh no, that little space that I moved into, I can only put 4 or 5 people in. That's going to be, I'm going to need something bigger. But you know what? Right now it's pretty easy for me to get a bigger space, Ian. So like the idea for me is, I know that I can scale up easily if need be. But in terms of my mindset, I'm not trying to scale up. I'm just trying to nurture what's here and what's working and what's real, not some idea about scale that's been implanted in our brains, but it's kind of not true or something.
Yeah, no, I actually completely agree with you. And I'm not, because again, you know, I'm all about cutting expenses. So I'm not saying build a stadium so that when they eventually come, you have somewhere to put them. What I'm saying is, let's make sure that that upper value is not a hard ceiling, but a cloud, right? A nice fluffy pink cloud or whatever. So that it's like, you know, oh, I've got everything I need above me, but if I happened to go through it, like that's okay too, rather than being afraid to have, again, the resiliency to say exactly that. I'm outgrowing my 4-person space. How do I want to creatively respond to this very good problem? In a way that invites in, as you know, as many as are truly my people. And I do think that again, that you're absolutely right, that a lot of the marketing advice that we get from marketers is all about, you know, the metrics and the this and the that, and none of that is really worth anything if they're not finding the people that really will stick, that really belong. You know.
Well, I think to your point about the cloud ceiling, I do think that's just a matter of like feeling self-worth. Like I deserve to have a good life or whatever. So I'm not greedy. Like I don't have very, very high aspirations. You know, I'm not, my goal is not to be wealthy. In a sense of like, I want to have extra money, but I would like to provide for my family and be able to give them an education. And, you know, so thinking realistically about that number, of course. But I do think there's this idea sometimes in our culture, especially there was like with social media, of like, oh, something I do will go viral and I become a millionaire. Or, and if I look good enough in my yoga video, then I get to be like yoga girl or whatever. But, what a lot of people don't understand is like, I know people who have 1 million followers on Instagram who don't make as much money off of them as I do off of 4,000 email addresses.
And here's what you just said that I think is the core of the question, which is, do you feel like if you had the good problem to have and suddenly, you know, against all odds, whatever, you got $1 million contract with somebody to do their worldwide corporate yoga? I'm obviously making things up.
I don't know if I would do that, but go ahead. I'll go with you.
And that's sort of my question is, do you feel like accepting $1 million for a contract would make you feel greedy if you accepted it?
I love the question because I've worked very hard to have a kind of independence that most people in my field don't have. I have my own platform with the podcast. I have my own social media via emails and podcast and blog. And I've had occasions where there was an opportunity where I would have had to give up some of that independence for the potential. It wasn't $1 million on the table. See, that's what's interesting about your question. You know, Joe Rogan took the deal with Spotify because he got to retain ownership, and it was a ridiculous amount of money that nobody could refuse. So, you know, if it was literally $1 million on the table and I could still potentially own it later on or something, like it's a licensing deal rather than a ownership deal, maybe, yeah, I'm not opposed to cashing in on a big lottery ticket or something.
Yeah.
But I would say no if it meant giving up my independence.
Yeah.
Because I've worked too hard and it's too important to me. Like, it's my creative voice. And it would be very hard because there's probably an amount of money that would be really hard to pass up, you know, and it would be a whole bunch of justifications that would come into play to set my family up for future generations with a big fat money. Now, I can't imagine who would want me to do whatever for $1 million, but I like the question of it. I like to ponder the question of it in advance of it ever happening.
Yeah.
And, you know, I do think that I'm doing okay. I just got the mortgage. I don't know if I would say yes if it meant giving up what's so fundamental to my bliss and my fulfillment as an artist.
Right. Yeah. And I think that would be always the, you know, I mean, people offer to buy our bookkeeping firm all the time. And I'm like, no, you know, like,
yeah.
I'm not done with this yet. I'm still building this. I'm still making sure that, you know, that the client experience is the best that it possibly can be. And today we started talking about, like, we've been so focused on this. Are we doing the same work for our bookkeepers? Is our bookkeeper experience as good as it could be, especially since, you know, I mean, we were all working remotely before the pandemic, but are we doing enough to foster connection in our company and cohesiveness? Are we doing enough to support ourselves internally as well as externally? And, you know, and so I also have no interest in making money that way of, you know, selling my hard work for someone else. And I don't have my name attached to it. And I think it's way harder if it's, you know, it's not just a brand, but you are the brand. But yeah. I just love to, I mean, again, it's a question I love to ask because I just want to make sure that, you know, that we're all conscious of our bias.
Absolutely. I mean, I definitely have a bias just because of my life experience. I guess we all do. And I'm very aware of that because in this yoga business class we'd had, you know, we're advocating for some, you know, unconventional things. We're telling everybody to get off social media, and then someone's saying, well, hey, it's working for me. And so we've had to like say, okay, well, when would it make sense to do it? Like, you got to recognize, like, I don't like it and I hate it because I'm a Gen Xer or whatever. And I remember when it was innocent or whatever, you know what I mean? And I recognize that I'm older and I don't care about TikTok or whatever. So I recognize that. But I also think that some of the supposed new stuff that is actually not good for independent creators, you know, like it's happened in a lot of industries. My producer and friend who I work with, you know, he's in the music industry, he's a composer. So he watched the same thing that happened in the journalism industry, you know, happen, and same for yoga teachers. So a lot of the things he's done with me, you know, even in terms of, you know, before the pandemic hit, I was kind of upend the traveling teaching circuit because there was like a way that everybody had been doing it. But we had this idea to do essentially like a living room tour, like musicians do living room tours, that actually I figured out that I can get an Airbnb space for a weekend and move a couple pieces of furniture and fit 7 to 10 mats and just do all the registration myself and actually make the same amount of money with 7 people. That was the minimum I was asking for from all of these other centers. And they're struggling to get people in. And sometimes they have 35 people and they're still barely making my minimum. That, again, there was like all these different ways to kind of envision, like, I don't have to do it the same way that everybody else is doing it. And that actually, I stopped doing social media and I saw an increase in email subscribers and sales. And it's so counterintuitive because it goes against what everybody's been told what to do or what is the right thing to do. So I don't know, to me, I think that there is almost an idea sometimes of, if everybody's doing that, I shouldn't be doing it or something. And I don't know if that's always true, but it's like the directional thing is not to be just doing what you see everybody else doing, but to like figure out what the right thing for you to do is.
Yeah. And that's hard without support, but I think it's absolutely true. You know, there's the whatever, it's sort of a classic business story. I don't know if it gets told anywhere else, of the family that makes the pot roast. I guess I don't make pot roast, so I don't know, where they cut the ends off and put it in the pan and put it in the oven. And someone's like, well, why do we do it that way? And the person says, I don't know, that's how mom does it. And I asked the mom, I don't know, that's how grandma does it. And grandma goes, oh, we did that because it didn't used to fit in the pan. And so that thing that once had a reason has now become so dilute that it's like the way things are done, right? And how we sort of over fetishize past structures that have no bearing on current. Yeah, but again, like, that's a bold move. I think it also different is very noticeable, right? I mean, that's what our brains pay attention to, is the difference, not the same. Mm-hmm. Move to a new apartment, it's hard to sleep for the first couple of nights because the noises are all different. Once your brain calculates them as the same, you sleep great. Yeah. Fascinating. We could talk for hours. I think we have talked for almost an hour though, and I don't want to make you.
See, it's easy for us to talk. Old friends. You know, what I will say about old friends is recently I had like my first get together with some people like in forever. And it felt like strange. Like there's all this re-navigating the social engagement again. And I ended up just going to visit some really old friends from college, because it's like the people who you have those early bonds with, like you and I have, like, I know you from such a formative time in my life. Yeah. I easily fall back into a dynamic and friendship with you, even though we almost never speak.
Right.
And like right now, re-navigating the social engagement, it's like a really nice way to do it. So for whatever it's worth to anybody out there, if you can find some old friends to hang out with, sometimes it's a nice way to re-engage with the world.
I agree. Cool. Well, thank you, Jay, for taking the time. It's always fun to do this. I'll probably hit you up again in a couple of months and be like, let's have another on-camera conversation where we just let anybody who wants to watch, because I do think, you know, it's just always so fun and valuable and blissful to talk to you. So,
well, I'm here because of you. Our friendship, like I said, played a role for me. And even that conversation we had on my show, when you shared some of what you do now and how you help people now in your work, helped me get the damn mortgage. So I will come as many times as you want. You just let me know.
Awesome. It was lovely talking to you. We'll talk again soon.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.